Welcome back, all you fabricants and flashbacks, to the super, not funny show, Gamercast. The Gamercast, where we talk about all things video game, PC, consoles, software, hardware, all that fun stuff. I am Mo De Poupe, your resident fabricant and commenter extraordinaire on all things pop culture. And of course, I can't talk video games without the resident video game designer and, of course, lover of all things superhero anime. My good friend Lottie. Lottie, how you doing this evening?
Oh yeah, I'm doing great, man. Got a good episode for you guys. Wanted to talk about like a little bit of history. I hope you guys enjoy.
That's right. This episode, we are talking about the video game Wayback Machine. We're gonna take you back to the previous decades. Can you believe it? That, you know what? On the real, can you believe it? It has been like a little over 40 years. Yeah, a little over 40 years since the modern video game era has existed. If you know your history about video games, of course, there were video games way back, in the 70s, even like the late 60s, 70s on some equipment. But video gaming, as we know and understand it today, kind of hit off in like the very late 70s, and really we'll count it as the 80s. So there's a lot that went on over the decades, and we're gonna just skim over some of that and really kind of give our perspective on that. But first, as always, we have to jump into some video game news. There's always new things coming out in the video game community and in the video game space, and we want to just touch on some of that this week. And we're going to be following up this week on more talking about Intel's Alder Lake processors. And we're also going to speak about the potential for a Capcom, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, maybe remake or, remaster that may be coming out as a result of some fan outcry. And we'll speak about upcoming DLC for Marvel's The Avengers. So all that, plus we're going to talk again about gaming through the different eras. So let's jump into that right now. Alder Lake. That's I know that Lottie has had Lottie, you've had much to say about this, right? I know you're our foremost expert on what's going on with the processors and in particular Alder Lake. So I'm not really huge up on this, but apparently shots fired on this one. They're coming for the Zen 3 processor. So what's that all about?
So, see, the thing about Zen 3, they're great CPUs. The only problem is they were way overpriced. A 6-core CPU should never be $300, and an 8-core CPU should never be $450. Their higher end SKUs are not too bad. I mean, the 5950X is a little bit overkill, $800, and you can get the 12 core for $550, kind of overkill. So I was always, I always been telling you guys, and from what I've been hearing, that Intel wants to price their CPU chips very competitively against AMD, because they know one thing that AMD can do to ease. Like, let's say Intel decided to make you see how the 12900K is $600. Let's say maybe it might come in at, let's say, at worst, let's say they decide to price it at $800 because it's better than the 5950X. All AMD has to do is make the 5950X $700. It's been out for over a year. They pretty much made their money back. Then all of a sudden, the 12900K is a lame duck. Intel wants you to buy this CPU. So they're going to price it competitively. And guys, I'm telling you right now, you guys need to look at the 12700KF and the 12600KF. $260 for 6 plus 4 cores. You can't beat that. You cannot beat that price. I would even look at the at the Ryzen 5, because right now it's selling for $275. Would even look at it unless the Ryzen 5 is like 225 bucks. If the 12600 KF comes out at around 260 bucks, it's a done deal. Guys, get that. You'll save so much money. And if you guys looking for a little bit higher end, that 12700 KF at $400, come on, man. You're getting a 8 plus 4 core CPU for $400. That's pretty much the standard price of an 8 core right now. And this is technically a 12 core. I mean, it may not be completely as strong as a 12 core, but what we're hearing, the 12700K and this 12700 KF is supposed to be on par with a 5950X, which is a 12 core now. I mean, not a 5950X, 5900X, which is a 12 core. So guys, those are the CPUs you should look at. If you haven't built your PC or you're looking to build a PC, those two CPUs I'll look at. You're probably wondering what the F at the end stands for. The F at the end means the CPU doesn't come with graphics. You probably, if you're buying a $250 CPU and a $400 CPU, I'm pretty sure you're going to buy a graphics card to play with it, because you should have spent that much money to get a console.
Right. Well, I mean, but on the other hand, with the way graphics card prices are right now, maybe the one that comes with onboard graphics is the way to go at first.
Well,
I personally don't believe in that, just because I'm like, you're right. If you are going to be building a gaming PC, it's kind of dumb to go ahead and go with the onboard graphics. I don't see the point of that.
Well, see, the good thing about this, remember this goes back and to show you, remember I told you that the 6600 XT is going to basically stay in stock and be good at stock. You can go on Newegg right now and get a 6600 XT paired with the motherboard. Yep, you can get a 6600 XT paired with a motherboard right now for $654. An Intel motherboard right now. So this is a high-end motherboard too. So you can get this plus the CPU, the $250 CPU. That'll be what, like $900? I mean, yeah, that's still a lot of money. But if you're wanting to build a PC, you're looking to spend, you know what I mean? If you're spending $250, $400 on a CPU, you're looking to spend an over $1,000 PC.
Right.
But there is a way you can get getting graphics card is not as hard as it used to be. Or you can go on another place you can go get a graphics card, guys. You can go on Micro Center. There's one in Georgia. I know that's kind of a drive, but it's in Atlanta. So if you ever decide to make a drive there, Micro Center is selling bare bones PCs that come with the motherboard, the power supply, and the graphics card for $900 in a case. For $900. In the graphics card of the 3060. So that's a good deal. You know what I mean? It's not as hard as it used to be to get a graphics card. So if you're looking to build a PC with Alder Lake, those are the CPUs I would look at.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like that lower end price, that's really what I'm looking at, because I'm not a performance gamer. The games I play don't require a lot of graphical oomph. So that 12600 KF seems like a good deal.
Yeah.
The only downside is I would have to basically build from the beginning. I couldn't use this as like
you couldn't.
I couldn't upgrade because I'm running AMD right now. So
yeah.
But still, I mean, if you're like to, if you're not like me, I'm not the person to go with. Because I'm pretty sad. I have my computer for a year. I'm pretty satisfied with it. It's not going to be doing anything major like yours is. So I'm good with mine. But like in another year or two, I'll probably be looking at turning my main PC into some kind of like media PC or something for the and then I want to build a real computer, and then this is definitely an option.
Yeah, this is, and really like just one more thing before we go to another topic. What makes this 12600KF so appealing? At its 6 cores, all you really need to game is 4 cores. So you get leftover 2 big cores, and then you get 4 small cores to do productivity. So if you want to game and stream, this is what makes all the This is why I'm really like excited about the 12600KF. This brings game streaming to the mid-range market. You don't have to spend $400 and above to become a game streamer now. You'd only have to spend about $250. You know what I mean? Like this is like going to change the game for CPUs in the coming future. It's bringing game streaming / content creation to the mid-range. This is like really good for the future. Like honestly, I really think this 12600KF is probably better at productivity than my 9900K. Like I'm not joking. It probably is better at productivity than my 9900K. And I spent $400 on my 9900K, and this thing is coming out at $250. So
yeah. Well, so sounds like a good deal. And again, the CPU wars heating up. They're heating up. So I mean, everyone place your bets right now.
Yep.
Either way, more competition, we all win. So cool.
Yep.
All right. So moving on, we're going to talk about a game that I don't know if you saw. Did you see this on social media? A bunch of people were like hashtagging, like, you know, I don't even remember what the hashtag was. I just remember it was people talking about bring back Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which, and we, you know, I mentioned Marvel vs. Capcom, you know, many episodes ago when we were talking about, you know, favorite games or whatever, comic book games. Actually, it's on the Supercast, but we were talking about comic book games, and Marvel vs. Capcom is a classic.
Yes.
And Marvel vs. Capcom 2, if you follow any sort of fighting game, you know, content creators or just players or high-level players, it is very highly regarded, extremely highly regarded amongst the fighting game community. And I didn't know this, but apparently it is not available digitally anywhere.
So fucking stupid.
I did not. To me,
yes,
I did not realize, because I was like, oh, they got Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite and, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and all, but no 2. It's really strange. And
you have to have a PS2. You have to have a PS3, and it already has to be on your thing because you just can't buy it off the store anymore.
Yeah, so that's I was like, well, that's really strange. Like, do you guys just hate money or something?
Yeah.
But you know what? There's more to it than that. You know, I realized there was more to it than that when I looked into this a little more. This isn't just about, oh, you know, these guys just don't want money. No, I think it's actually, apparently it's a rights issue, because Marvel vs. Capcom 2 predates Disney's ownership of the Marvel license, you know, of Marvel, and so this is a licensing issue apparently, and it really is about probably, I'd say it's about some executives that don't realize the gold, you know, the gold mine they're sitting on, and now that people have been like, seriously, we will pay you real you know, dollars. We'll pay you real calorie shells. What kind of currency do you want? We want this game that we can play on our PlayStation 4s and 5s, or whatever other console you want. And apparently there is a developer who kind of specializes in remasters and remakes, and they're just like, hey, we're ready when you guys are ready. So we've, you know, the news here is, after all of that, is apparently Disney and Capcom are they're talking about this as a result of the fan outcry. So, yay, you guys did it. For a change, we did something good instead of being toxic about things. So
yeah.
Anyway, I know you played Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I can tell you have some strong opinions about this. So, Lottie, you hear this? What are your thoughts?
About fucking time. God dang. I grew up on Marvel vs. Capcom. One of my favorite games of all time. About fucking time. I mean, I played every console. I'm gonna be honest with you. I played almost every iteration of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Not lying to you. I played it on the PlayStation 1. I played it on the Dreamcast. I played it on the PS2. I played it on the PS3. I played every iteration of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 there is, and I absolutely love the game. My only thing that I will critique about Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is that they got rid of the character themes from Marvel vs. Capcom 1. They brought them back in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, so I'm hoping when they do the remake, they bring back the character themes. Or the remaster, bring back the character themes. Because those are not themes that you have to license. Capcom owns them. You know what I mean? Capcom made the themes. So I would oh man. One of my favorite YouTubers, his name is Maximilian.
Maximilian Dude. Yes.
Yeah. So he makes bring back Marvel vs. Capcom 2 video at least twice a month. It's like he'll be on stream with him and like Justin Wong just talking about like why is this game just not out anymore?
Now see this is my wheelhouse because I'm not a great fighting game player, but I am really into it and I follow a lot of these guys. I did not realize until Justin Wong started talking about it. I didn't realize this was a thing, and a lot of people are chiming in. A lot of the people who are hardcore Street Fighter, or even, they're even playing, not Blaze Blue. What's the other the new one? I can't remember. Anyway, there's a new
Guilty Gear.
The new Guilty. A lot of Guilty Gear players. Even a lot. I have to be honest. A lot of the DBZ, the Dragon Ball Fighters Z, a lot of those because it's a very similar kind of game. A lot of those people are old school Marvel vs. Capcom players. A lot of Smash Brothers players are old school. So there's basically the DNA of Marvel vs. Capcom is very strong throughout the fighting game community. And so, and the one thing about fighting games, like you play shooters and all that. How many people are really going back and playing Call of Duty Black Ops 1 right now? Like, I mean, and I'm serious. Like, you have Black Ops 3. How many people are dedicated to playing Black Ops 1? How many people are dedicated to playing the first Battlefield?
I think the only like shooting game, like FPS game, like of the Call of Duties that it actually has a strong cult following is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 1, to where they really remastered the game and remade it.
But
that's the only one.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, in the fighting game community, it's a different story. They're legit. They're smaller because the games are older. But there are still, if you go to any one online or offline tournament, they do Street Fighter 2. All the Street Fighter 2s, they do all of the Street Fighter alphas. They do
Third Strike
you
Online.
Could, right now, if you wanted, if you wanted to, you could play Infinite against a bunch of people players. So the point is that the community's there. There are people who spent hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars getting good at Marvel vs. Capcom 2, like in the arcade, and they can't wait to kick each other's ass. Right now, they just can't, Yeah. So, like, to be honest, I don't understand why no one knew this was a thing. Where are these executives at Disney? They're so quick to throw Marvel's license around at Sony right now. What the fuck were they with this one? I don't get it.
It's just see, fighting games are one of the few gaming franchises that is still very vintage. Because like you said, like a fighting game doesn't just come out and people move on. Like, for example, like Call of Duty comes out every year and people move on from the Call of Duties after about 2 years when the next Black Ops, whatever, comes out. But there are still people playing Tekken 4 to this day. Yep. Tekken 4 came out almost 20 years ago. Actually, it is 20 years. Tekken 4 came out in 2001. There's people still playing Tekken Tag, the original Tekken Tag, because they made an online version for it. There's still people playing.
Remember, they literally just re-released Virtual Fighter 5. Like for PlayStation Plus. I mean, like, and people actually took the time to start learning how to play that game. This, like, the people in the fighting game community, it's partly because it's partly nostalgia driven. You can tell by the way that, you know, they, like in Street Fighter. Street Fighter is very much, it remembers what everybody liked about the previous ones. Like they do new things, but they always bringing back old characters. You know, your core characters. So basically, you can, you know, transfer your skills from one game to another. But they also know that, you know, you can still go back and still play the old ones. I mean, so not just nostalgia, but just like, it's almost like comfort food for people in the fighting game community. And this, could there be another gigantic, you know, what's a good comfort food? A big old pot of stew, a big old pot pie, a big old, you know, delicious piece of cake than Marvel vs. Capcom 2? Could it be, the only thing that could be more like that is, like you said, the old Tekken or you know, Street, or people that really like Street Fighter Alpha, you know, stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, like, this again, where were the money people at? Because I thought they knew when stuff is good. Why do we gotta tell them, hey, we'll pay you cash money for this? I don't get that.
Yeah, I don't
get
it either.
It's good to know, though. Hey, I'm terrible at the tag game, so I'm probably not gonna play it. But it's good to know that it's you know, it's gonna be coming out, and it'll be fun to see some of the content that comes out. So we'll keep you guys apprised of that when we find out more. Mm-hmm. Final video game news. Just a little bit of for you guys, the small number of people that are still playing Marvel's The Avengers. Well, you know what? Sony hasn't given you know, not Sony, but Square Enix hasn't given up. They paid all the money for that damn license. They're gonna milk this bitch as much as they can. And so we know that they just released the Black Panther expansion for Marvel's Avengers, and Spiderman is on its way. But apparently, Spider-Man's not the only one. They are planning to add more heroes beyond Spider-Man to the Marvel the Avengers. So, I don't know how everyone feels about this game, but I would have to say, because these aren't DLCs as far as I don't know. Is Spider-Man DLC? I can't tell for sure. I know Black Panther was not. So these just appear to be what I would call quality of life updates to the game. Essentially making a game that at launch people are like, what the hell? And now it's turning into more of, okay, this is a game that, this is a game that actually is worth the money you spent on it. So, I don't know. What do you think, Lottie?
I feel like it's really like, you know, they talked about Spider-Man a while ago, and oh wow, this, you know, I'm looking at their rating now. They're mostly positive this recently. So yeah, like you just said earlier, they're finally they're No Man's Sky in this game, making it better. You know, I mean, I got it for free, so I'll play it. So it's cool that they're finally going back and like adding these new stuff to it, because honestly, like it kind of like sucks that a game that is one of the most successful, not just like superhero franchises, movie franchises of all time, a game directly based off of that just did so terribly. And you know, they didn't listen to the fans, but it seems like now they're like, okay, we're listening, and we're going to make the game a lot more fun and a lot more palpable and easier to play. So I'm happy for that. I'm happy to see how Spider-Man is going to be introduced into the game. I'm actually want to see how. Like, it's kind of going to be interesting how he plays. But I'm cool. I'm happy for this.
Well,
I want to see how it goes.
Yeah. So I mean, are they going to take cues from Spider-Man games? I don't feel like they probably will, but I mean, we'll see. I think more content can't be bad, especially if this well thought out. Apparently, the Black Panther expansion was good. So if they kind of go at it like that, like every time they add a new character, it kind of expands this game into something good. Like at some point, will they make it so that you're like, okay, these new expansions are good, and if they're significant enough, can they actually get you to pay for the DLC? That's the thing. It's like as they are expanding, as they fix this game more, will they get to the point where it's a complete enough game with a good enough experience that you actually will want to pay for the DLC? It remains to be seen. I'm trying to figure out how they make money off of this game. No, because they don't have microtransactions and they don't have DLC as far as I understand. Do they have microtransactions?
Epic foreshadowing.
But
yeah.
But I don't think so. But
I don't think so either.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's all good for them. They're not like, oh man, it didn't make the millions and millions we wanted it to make, so let's abandon it. I'm glad that that's not the way that they're going. So we'll look forward to that when we see Spider-Man and whatever else comes out. We'll talk about it when it comes out. So that's all the news for the week. Not small week this week, but that just means we have even more time to talk about our main topic. But maybe we missed something in the news that we should have been talking about on the Gamercast. And you know what? You know how you let us know about that? Get down to the comment section. Let us know what you're thinking. And of course, you can always hit us up, supernotfunnyshow@gmail.com or at supernotfunny1 on Twitter. And, we'll chop it up. Maybe we can use your suggestion. We'll talk about it on the next one. So let us know. But we do have this main topic that we need to get to. This is a very expansive topic, let me just say. Talking about the different gaming eras. Starting from the 80s, we're not going to go in the 70s because it's not a ton there, but starting from the 80s on. And really kind of our point here is to, as I understand, this is kind of a bit of a request to sort of comment on what gaming was like, through the different decades. And, one of us was actually there for all of these decades.
Yeah.
One of us was actually here for some of this, for all of these decades. So I'll probably
in my defense, my dad and uncle liked video games, and I played a lot of those 80s video games, but I didn't experience it. So
well, yeah, and I'll just go ahead and say, I was there for the 80s stuff, but man, I was poor, so it's not like I had all of this stuff.
Yeah,
but,
see, guys, just letting you guys know, gaming. You think gaming is expensive now? Oh my God, was it expensive back in the 90s and the 80s? Jeez.
Yeah,
it was expensive.
So we'll talk about gaming through the gaming Wayback Machine. So
yeah,
let's travel into the past, way back in time to the fabulous 80s. Everyone loves the 80s music and all that stuff. It is. Let's just be honest. Where we wouldn't be where we are now without the video game bonanza of the early 80s. Started by you guys think there's three consoles now. You have no idea what it was like in the early 80s to have literally a dozen of different consoles by different manufacturers, with all sorts of varying levels of goodness of their games. But everyone always remembers the Atari. They forget like the ColecoVision and the various computers that are also video game, the Commodore 64. And so there's a bunch. I'm not gonna name all, but this was at the the very earliest, so graphics were terrible, dots and circles and the like, and controls were rudimentary at best. A joystick with a button, or or the little the turn with the little, I forget what they call it, the trackball, and then a little wheel and stuff like that, and they were. But you know what? Imagine, if you will, that you've never seen a video game ever. All you're used to is just watching TV. And then suddenly you have the ability to control stuff on TV and, dodge and shoot and all that. And also, this is a time of just abject lying on the part of of the various video game manufacturers, because boy, they made the games look so much better in the illustrations on the box than they ever were on the TV. Which isn't to say there wasn't awesome stuff. This was the time, the earliest arcade games, before, because everyone couldn't really afford, $600-$700 for an Atari. And so this was when Pac-Man and Dig Dug and Donkey Kong, Galaga, all these the foundational titles, even Mario, the first Mario, not Super Mario Brothers, Mario Brothers, which was one of the first competitive platformers, and you can see some of that later on in the re-releases of Mario All Stars and whatnot. That was the first half of the '80s, and it was, when I say it's a bonanza, I'm not, you want to look this up or see any documentaries, they were literally taking anything and plastering something, any movie, any whatever, let's make a little video game, have one or two people make a game and whatever, and there were some real gems, and like Pitfall or Adventure or whatnot, and it really sucked a lot of people in. That's where the video game nerds got their start, and even people learning how to program. And then someone always has to shit the bed. So, Vladi, you know what I'm gonna say, right?
What?
You know what almost killed video games? What almost killed video games? The worst video game. The worst video game of that era, because I think that there's probably a worse video game. But the E.T. tie-in that destroyed Atari as a console maker, and basically is honestly, I don't think it's single-handedly is responsible for killing gaming at the time. I think it's more of the whole, let's just make anything into a game. They'll just buy it because it's a video game, and people getting burned too much on that. I mean, E.T.'s just kind of the last straw. So that was that was in the mid '80s, and who should come around but a little upstart, company from Japan called Nintendo. And Lottie, I know you played a bunch of Nintendo when you were a kid. Old school rectangular pad Nintendo. Wait, what did you get? Did you get controller? Did you get Nintendo Thumb?
No, we got the gun. Got the little.
No, you know what I mean. Like you play so much that your thumb is hurt from the squared off.
Oh my god! Yeah, the controllers fucking sucked. Those controllers sucked, man. My hands hurt it as a kid. Oh, I hated this. The N64 was. I mean, not the N64. The original NES was a great console. Controller was just terrible.
Everything was just like a sharp point, like that.
Oh,
so it's the D-pad was awful. But my God, the NES. What can we like? The NES had competitors. We agreed. Sega existed. It had the Sega was it? I forget what the name of its console was. That's how unimportant it was. There was a
Are you talking about
Sega.
the original? Yeah,
Yeah,
I forgot what the original. Wasn't it called like the Neo G? I can't remember.
no, the Sega. It was not the Mega Drive. The Mega Drive was later, but
Yeah.
anyway, the point is, there were other gaming consoles, but Nintendo for real though.
I actually have a cool. I actually got a cool, funny story about Nintendo and Atari and what truly buried Atari at the end. So when Nintendo was trying to bring the NES to America, they did not feel after seeing how ET felt, they did not feel that Americans will buy their console. So they came to Atari and decided to have a partnership. And when they bring the Nintendo to America, they had a contract to say, "Hey, we will rebrand the console as the Atari Nintendo, and you guys will get royalties for allowing us to sell it under your name, so we can get it into the American public." Great deal, right? You would think that Atari will sign that immediately. Well, turns out they misplaced the the form, the document to sign, and Nintendo just got impatient and said, "We'll just bring it over to America ourselves." And the final, basically, shovel in Atari ended with misplaced documents.
Nice. Wait, who knows what would have happened, man? We do know that the Nintendo. Let me just say, has there been a more, and I mean like in terms of like longevity, has there been a more successful console than the NES? I mean, this thing lasted over a decade, and when I say over a decade, I mean, you know, you're talking about from 85 to 95, it was still a legit console. And in fact, I can guarantee you, in Japan at least, there were still games coming out for the NES up to 2000, like the early 2000s.
Oh yeah,
just it is. You know, if you thought the Atari 2600 was what really, you know, kicked off gaming, the NES was it. Everyone wanted one. It was so big that it even had Mario 3 had a sort of a movie-length commercial for it called The Wizard. And if you're any self-respecting gamer, ought to have seen The Wizard, just for an understanding of nostalgia and what Nintendo was like. Like, Pac-Man Fever was a thing back in the early 80s where everyone wanted to play Pac-Man. But just Pac-Man. But in the mid to late 80s, or up until starting the 90s, everyone wanted a Nintendo, period. Mario, and you know why? It was because of his genius. You know the genius thing that they did was when they made the Nintendo, you got the Nintendo, you got two controllers and you got a game. And that game was one of the greatest platform games of all time. Like it in my opinion, Super Mario Brothers is the defining platform game because it told you everything you needed to know about being a platform. Everything else after that is just making Mario better.
Yeah.
So you got a game. It's like, imagine you young people. Back in my day, we got a game with our consoles.
Yep.
So you can be like, oh, the PlayStation 2. I agree. PlayStation 2, technological marvel. Everyone loved it, so forth. But it didn't come with the fucking game. and Nintendo did. And everyone played Mario. Everyone, you imagine, if you will, now think about the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe. How many people do you know that have not seen at least one Marvel movie? Right? Think about that. The same way that is, everyone played Mario at least one time. Everyone's played Mario. Everyone knew the music, all that stuff. That started off the whole Nintendo supremacy for the better part of the next 15 years. Like until we got, but we'll get to that soon. The point is, the latter half of the 80s was all about Nintendo. But we can't just talk about that in the consoles. The arcade became a thing. Like, if you're a young person now, you probably barely even, if you ever saw an arcade, you barely know what you probably associate an arcade with, where your uncle or your mom or whatever go to illegally play like slot machines. That's what you think an arcade is. Back in the 80s, arcades was maybe the only place you got to play video games.
Yep.
Might be the only place you ever saw a video game at all. And it was an era of they called them quarter munchers. And because you literally could sit there and blow, $20, trying to beat Double Dragon, or, trying to, or if in the earlier days, trying to play pole position and not blow up immediately. or trying to play the new beat 'em ups or whatever, or Arkanoid. It was just like, it was amazing. When you were a kid that didn't have a whole lot of money, but you had $1, you could go there, and if you were any good, you could sit there and play, Golden Axe, or you could go and play, Gauntlet or something like that.
And you know what we all do remember though, because like I said, I'm at least old enough where arcades were still, big when I was growing up. That one kid, you always hope that you were that one kid that was so good at the game that you start drawing a crowd, and everybody's like, he's actually getting past the boss. Wait, hold on, how are you doing that?
Yeah.
And then people actually give you coins so you could beat the game or beat the high score.
There was etiquette. You put a quarter up because you had next. You put a quarter on the screen. You had next. This was the time when you couldn't save. Like you guys have save games. That's nice of you. This is the time you beat the game on that quarter, or you beat the game if you had a Nintendo at home. If you're lucky, they were like, all right, we'll do a save state thing, but you have to copy down this code and you have to put it back in if you want to come back to this. Other than that, you beat it, or you turned it off. And or like I used to do, you'd get to a certain point and leave that damn console on, and then you come back to it hours later when you could come back and play some more. This was
it ever happened where your mom or dad tripped over the cord
while you're in the middle of doing something? Or how about, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the advent of certain genres, because this was during the infancy of I don't want to say the infancy of gaming. So this is where we see some standard genres start to sort of appear. Platformer, I mentioned Mario, and everyone trying to be Mario. There were so many people trying to be a Mario. And never quite pulling off. They get close. I mean, some of them get close, but not quite. This is where we had the arcade shooters like Arkanoid or 1942. Basically, they call them shmups, shoot 'em ups, right? That's those, and then RPGs, and these are different kinds. So text-based RPGs where you just type out what's happening and it tells you what's going on. Then you had stuff like King's Quest, which were sort of text RPGs with good graphics, but you didn't control anything really like you'd expect now. But I think you'll agree with me, one of the biggest genres, one of the best things that happened in the 80s with video games is the appearance of the Japanese RPG. With Final Fantasy, Grandia, those kind of the Japanese RPG, which is essentially Japanese nerds are serious nerds, and when they got a hold of D&D originated in the 70s. When Japanese gamers got a hold of D&D, and then they learned how to program, they just turned the JRPG was born. honestly, for RPGs, computer RPGs, the most difficult brand of RPGs you're bound to run across in in history. Like they're very rewarding, but I mean, a lot of people play. They're like, "Oh, you play Final Fantasy," and they're talking about like 7 or something. No, I'm talking about 1, Final Fantasy 1, and which is one of the hardest damn games you're likely to run across because they're this sadistic.
Yeah.
So that was the 80s, man. The 80s was like I said, infancy. There was a lot of throwing shit at the wall, right, and seeing if it's any good. And there was a lot of not good in that era, but there was a lot of really good.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No. I was just saying the 80s. The 80s was that time where gaming really like I would say it's the silver age of gaming. We haven't.
Would you say silver age? That's I'll call that.
Yeah, because the next era I will call the golden age.
Yeah, that 80s was when a lot of what I would call many of the godfathers, the pantheon, if you will, of video gaming. Some of whom are still making games now. Shigeru Miyamoto, still making games. He was making like Mario and shit like that. So this young, these are a lot of young programmers video game designers really kind of figured out what it was all about in the 80s. So the 90s. This is, you know what? I'm gonna let you do a lot of the talking here because I know you've got a lot to say about the 90s. But the 90s was first of all, the arcade went ham in the 90s. This is the 90s and with the arcade was when you got fighting games, when you got beat 'em ups, right? Especially like stuff like The Simpsons or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Final Fight, that sort of thing. But this is when like it really kind of blew up. You got rail shooters. You got you even started to get some of what we would call like the more interactive racing games and all that in the 90s. You got the rise of the second generation of consoles, or I guess I could call it the third generation. The 16-bit consoles came out, and you had the first. Well, you had the first console wars were in the 80s, where there was just a bunch of people going at each other. But the second console began right between Nintendo and Sega.
Yep.
And you saw what I would call the 90s the most, like the biggest technological leap, because it started out with the 8-bit Nintendo and it ended with the 64-bit. So
yeah.
But and the PlayStation appeared. So it's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. As I hinted earlier, 90s was, I will call, the golden era of video gaming. It was the era that we'll look back on and say, my God, a lot of, like you just said, a lot of stuff changed. Because, I was born in the early 90s, but I had a brother that was born in the 80s. And me and my older brother are extremely close. So, honestly, guys, I'm not lying to you. I was playing games like at the age of 2. I'm not lying. Really started really gaming like at 3 or 4 years old. So I was we played. We didn't own. We owned an NES, but our dad bought us a Sega Genesis, and we played that because we never got a Super Nintendo. So I didn't really play Mario World except I went to This is another time that was an era. A lot of those boys and girls clubs, yeah, that's where we used to play a couple like Super Mario games. But like we had the Sega. We played a lot of Sonic, and I mean a lot of Sonic. We owned Sonic 2. This was back when cheat codes became the advent of cheat codes, baby. Those cheat code books.
What's the most famous one?
Up, down, down, down.
What's up, down, left, right, B, A, select, start.
Yep.
If you know what that is, you're pretty good. You know your history.
Yeah, man. Like it was everything, and you had to do it. See, back then when you had to put in cheat codes, you had to do it fast. You couldn't do it like slow. You had to do it fast, and there usually will be like a telltale to say, okay, you did it. And I'm gonna just be honest with you guys. You know what cheat codes really are? Just cheat codes are just literally the debug / testing mode that the game developers left in the game, and I guess after a while, especially when cheat codes started getting popular, they just left them there purposely so people could find it and then basically become God. You know what I mean? Eventually, of course, they took them out, but this was still in the era when you found out cheat codes, because also you got to remember the 90s, internet still wasn't anything. So you found this stuff out from word of mouth or literally someone who had a cheat code book,
or you had Nintendo Power,
Nintendo Power,
or Game Pro,
or Game Pro.
You guys haven't heard of these things? They used to make actual dedicated magazines that you could buy at the store. You couldn't because there was no internet really. So you went and bought things at the store and you learned about different video games. And you got cheat codes and walkthroughs and all that fun stuff.
Oh yeah, it's another thing that came out around this time: demo disc.
Well,
used to get them from Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
But that was a little bit later on. But the 90s was what we call, not only was it the golden era, it was the weird but cool game era and the advent of like a lot of 3D platformers, a new wave of, generation of, new wave of genre with fighting game, FPS games, sports franchises. But really what defined that era was Nintendo versus Sega. And as I'll go back, it was the weird / cool era. Sonic was made in the 90s. Let's be honest. Sonic is a blue hedgehog that runs really fast and wears red shoes. That is weird. But guess what? It stuck. And it was so 90s. Sonic was not like Mario, where Mario was the happy-go-lucky hero that saved Peach without question and was, a hero no matter what. Sonic was the too cool for school attitude. If you left him, if you left Sonic on the screen without moving him, he'll literally get impatient, look at the screen and at his watch and start tapping his feet like, hey, it was taking you so long. I feel like moving. You know what I mean? And that was like, oh man, there was just
it was an attitude. Yeah, it was. Sega was like they had kind of a kind of cool attitude, and this is like what we understand about console wars. Kind of came about then, exclusivity versus third parties versus. Who had the better genre. So, what was Sega better at than Nintendo? The Super Nintendo and Sega. At the time when Nintendo should have de facto won, Sega was actually outselling them for a while. And then you got, the console, dropping prices to see, could they get more people to buy the console and stuff like that. And crazy peripherals were showing up. I mean, this is all this is happening, and without and even then the Sega CD, Sega 32X, how to extend the life of the console.
Yeah.
And then all of that just to at the very end of it, CD-ROM based gaming to make its appearance, and Nintendo making a mistake because they decided to double down on cartridges. Whereas everyone else was going with CDs. And the PlayStation.
Yeah, the PlayStation came out. And that really, really messed up the N64. Because the N64 was more powerful than all of those consoles. Because they could make... Because if we go back and look at PS1 and Sega Saturn, especially Sega Saturn was weak. But if you go back and look at PS1 games and compare it to N64 games, it's not even in the same stratosphere. N64 games looked way better. better color, but the problem was they were on cartridge. Think about this. Why do you think there's a reason why in the original Mario 64, all Mario says is let's go or oof in a few things because they literally cannot fit voice acting into the N64. You know what I mean? There's all these games, even GoldenEye. The most you will hear is terrible. Hello, James Bond. That's like it. There's not anything else.
Right.
So a lot of times when you're playing N64 games, they had to make it to where you were telling your own story, and it caused a lot of games to fall flat on the N64 because you would just be like, what is the story of this game? This game is clearly trying to tell me a story, but I have no idea what it's doing because it cannot tell me.
There's a lot of text, basically.
A lot of text, and it's just no.
And then I was also at the time when they were doing full motion video. They were doing the rise of the cutscene on PlayStation. And we would be remiss if we did not mention what PC Gaming was doing, which I wasn't really into it a lot, but this coincided with the late '90s coincided with the release of GoldenEye, which, let's be honest, one of the greatest first-person shooters of all time, and it is to this day it is still being emulated and duplicated.
Yeah, two of the greatest first-person shooting games of all time came out in the 90s.
Yep.
So that and Doom.
Yep, Doom. But you had the Forerunner, so you had Quake.
Yep, Quake.
You had the Forerunner to that, which was Wolfenstein.
You had Duke Nukem.
Yeah, so this was this is, I think, the start of real, because PC gaming had always existed. But console gaming was seen as kind of a more friendly and cheaper alternative. But the rise of PC gaming as an active, community, a real viable part of the gaming community, was really in the late '90s when you had to have, a PC of a certain that's when you needed Windows. You had to have Windows 3.1. And you needed more dedicated hardware in order to play Doom, in order to play Quake, in order to play all the Duke Nukem. And so that's where I think you started seeing the fracturing of the gaming community into PC versus console, and that wouldn't really come back together again for the better part of the 15 years. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. The 90s though, I would agree. That's really where Nintendo solidified its place as sort of like a console manufacturer that delivered great games. Sony really kind of brought the PlayStation and brought 3D gaming into the forefront, CD-based gaming, and the console war between Nintendo and Sega sort of depleted Sega to the point that their one last desperate gamble on the Dreamcast, they kind of screwed themselves with their crappy DRM protection.
Unfortunate, because it was a great console, way ahead of its time. Sega, man, for them to make such a great console and it fall so flat, and then to prove the naysayers wrong, because there was during the 90s, because even it was such a big thing that even I as a kid heard it. Can Sonic go 3D? Because at the time there were so many 3D platformers. Mario went 3D with Mario 64. Sony came out with their own 3D platformer with Crash Bandicoot, but Sonic was still in that two-dimensional hellscape. Yeah, and they did it. And not only did they they somehow was able to make Sonic move as fast as he is in a 3D space at 60 FPS. Still to this day, it's one of those things that you just look back and say, how did Sega do it? And it changed 3D platformers forever. Like it was one of those. Of course, Mario 64 was the original one. It started all of that, but Sega proved that you can make a 3D platformer move extremely fast, and it will not break the console or the game.
Yeah, and it turned out, and the Dreamcast really apparently was much easier to develop for. So, I mean, it's just like they just screwed themselves with the DRM protection scheme. But that's the 90s, like especially like I said, toward the end of the 90s, like in the arcades, you had stuff like Time Crisis, and you had the rail shooters and more 3D. Like I think around this time, what was it? Tekken came out.
Yeah, Tekken.
And then you started what you started to see in the 90s. You started to see the technological distance between the arcade and the console diminish. That's when they were starting to sort. You used to think, oh, the best video games were going to be at the arcade, and you got a crappier version of it, like the Street Fighter games or Mortal Kombat. You could play them at home on your Sega or your Super Nintendo, but they weren't as good as in the arcade. But it's really kind of started to go away towards the end of the 90s, start going into the 2000s. And you just had but I think you had a lot of really defining games. There was a lot more experimentation, a lot more willing to take risks on weird or maybe unproven titles back in the nowadays we get sequel or iteration of this or iteration of that. But there was a bunch of like weird, like I see, you had Earthworm Jim. Earthworm Jim's weird. Like
it's a weird game.
If you've never played it, it's a weird game.
It's especially Earthworm Jim 1 is not that bad. Earthworm Jim 2 is, I'm talking about like literally, it's like the creator was high on speed or psychedelics making that game. Like it is weird.
Yeah.
But another thing that the 90s started also doing was also pushing the envelope.
I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Okay.
I could not hold that.
Okay, it's okay. So another thing that the 90s started pushing the envelope on was what the content, and what I mean content, that they could, and what I mean by content, I'm talking about mature content that they could put in a video game. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, there's a lot of games that came out on consoles in the 90s that were given a rated E or teen rating. If that game came out in today's day and age, it'll be rated M without a doubt. And there's, of course, 3 games that I want to bring up that really push the envelope. One of them is Conker's Bad Fur Day. Conker's Bad Fur Day is literally, it looks like a happy-go-lucky rated E Nintendo 64 game. No, in the world, it is not. It is a rated M, basically sexual simulator. Like real talk. When I talk about pushing sexual mature content, it literally, the whole point of the game is that Conker's girlfriend just got done working out and she wants to have sex. So she calls him at the bar that he always goes to, and Conker is drunk and he goes outside to go take a piss so he can sober up to go find his way home. And by doing that, he ends up getting lost and he needs to find his way back home. And during his way back home, he does some of the most lewd and ludicrous stuff that you will ever believe. I mean, as a kid, I played the game as a kid, and I could not believe what in the world I was playing. Another game, and I know everybody knows this, and they're going to immediately know exactly what I'm talking about, is Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat pushed the absolute limit when I talk about violence in a video game back then. There was nothing like it when I talked about absolute gore and violence. And the last game was not so popular, but it got a lot of kids in trouble because it was a free game that came out with the Sega Dreamcast. That was Blue Stinger. Blue Stinger, I'm not lying to you, Maurice. The title screen shows a butt naked fairy. Literally, as soon as you start the game, it literally shows a butt naked fairy flying close to the screen, and her tits basically cover up the screen as she flies away. And bruh, not lying to you,
Sounds like a winner.
I put the game into like when we got the Sega Dreamcast as a kid, right? Me and my brother got the Sega Dreamcast as a kid. My mom and dad, my dad bought it. My mom wanted to see the game that we got, and we were like, "Oh, it's a game called Blue Stinger." My dad was like, "Okay, put it in." We put it in the living room, bruh. When I talk about my mom's face, I knew we were in trouble. And she was like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Oh no!" And basically, my mom just ripped the game out of the console and hit it. It was just like, oh, and my dad looked at us and he wanted to get mad, but he knows it's not our fault.
Right.
It was crazy. And the game was rated E. So back then, and this is what it's going to segue into the 2000s. Back then, they got away with a lot of stuff putting in video games. Because even Sonic, let's be honest, there was some Sonic games like Sonic CD. If you put in a code wrong, bruh, it will start playing like music. Like that was kind of like psychedelic / nightmarish. Like they pushed like real crazy of the things that you could and could not put in a video game back in the 90s.
Yeah. Man, it's before the ratings were really a thing. Which you're right. The 2000s, that's where that all sort of changed. So we go into the 2000s. I'm assuming we're starting to get to some familiar territory. Members of the listening audience, and this is where modern gaming has really started to take shape. First of all, we have a new challenger has appeared, aka Microsoft decided to throw its hat into the Xbox.
Yep.
So we got a new console generation. The first console generation where Nintendo legit lost, like for real lost. This is the game, which is ridiculous because the GameCube was awesome.
The GameCube. I'm really surprised about that one.
But it was, Nintendo didn't get the third-party support they needed for it. Also, they were kind of busy, kicking ass at handheld market, which, they started off with the Game Boy, which was basically a black and white scaled down Nintendo back in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And then they proceeded to just be like, well, let's just make another one. Let's just make a Game Boy Color. So they made different versions. This is something you'll see as Nintendo continues forward. They'll just iterate. They'll iterate their hardware. So then the Game Boy got some color. Then it it got smaller and with the 16-bit with the Game Boy Advance. So the Game Boy Advance and then later on the DS were the things in the early 2000s, where they cemented their place as the de facto, leaders of handheld gaming.
Handheld gaming, yep.
I mean, Sega tried with the Game Gear, but it just cost too much and didn't have any real killer apps besides Sonic. So
Sony made a dent with the PSP. The only problem with the PSP is the games were fucking fragile. Come on, Sony.
Yeah, they decided stupidly to go with like the whole cartridge only thing. Nintendo abandoned it with the GameCube, and they went with some stupid little proprietary whatever format. And that's part of the reason why GameCube was kind of dumb, but in its approach. But with the handhelds, they knew you can't be having discs with a handheld system that doesn't make any sense because they they skip and scratch and whatever. So they stuck with the tried and true, cartridge. And Sony's among its other missteps, PSP wasn't a bad idea. In fact, it was a very good piece of hardware. But the UMD thing was dumb.
It was absolutely.
It was just stupid.
And what makes this really bad is that this was at the time where cartridges, the cartridge tech really started taking off because that's around the time when micro SD started coming out. So
Yeah.
Sony coming out with the UMD was absolutely stupid.
But,
It was just a
it was
stupid
dumb.
idea.
It was dumb too because they even had their own little stupid little proprietary
They had a memory
thing
card.
with the memory, with the memory stick or whatever. It's
Yeah.
called. So the UMD was like an unnecessary bit of manufacturing, and also again, it's just far less. It's far more fragile than just like a cartridge.
Yeah.
And it's harder to keep up with. They were bigger than cartridge. Like, you know, they were about the same size as a Game Boy cartridge. But when it came to Game Boy Advance cartridge, and also they were the other reason why the PSP it was a good idea in terms of, you know, advancing the technology, but they forgot the kind of the cardinal rule of handheld gaming, which
Battery
is
life.
well, yeah, okay, two cardinal rules. One of them, yes, battery life is important, but also what it looks like is less important than what it plays like. And you know, people were fine with 16-bit graphics as long as the games were on point. And the Game Boy Advance games were on point because it was basically a small Super Nintendo, and Japanese developers had been making games for Super Nintendo for the better part of 15 years.
Yeah, so basically,
yeah.
it allowed people to play a lot of, especially a lot of the Final Fantasies that did not make it to America. Because what was it? I think like Final Fantasy 1, and I think a lot of the other Final Fantasies until 7 did not come to America. Like I think Final Fantasy 3, 4, 5, and 6 did not come to America. It like your first time playing them was on Game Boy Advance.
Right.
You know what I mean? A lot of them just skipped out on America. We got 7, and that was the main thing. Is like you said, a lot of things that eventually, like, because Sony, the like you said, the PSP was basically a remastered PS1 / maybe a little bit weaker Dreamcast. I really would say it was a weaker Dreamcast because a lot of Dreamcast games came out on PSP, like Power Stones Collection, Tony Hawk Pro Skater Collection. A lot of the games that I grew up playing on Dreamcast came out on PSP. That's one of my things I loved about the PSP. I got to play a lot of my old Dreamcast games again on the go,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they had the right idea. And in fact, you saw that they went on to do the PS Vita. And again, same idea, but and it was a good console. This is something in the 2010s, but it was a good console, but just losing out on the general idea that you don't have to be graphically superior. You don't
know what
have,
I think it is?
Graphic superiority is not as important as the gameplay.
You know what I think it is? What killed the PS Vita? It came out way too early. If the PS Vita came out today, it will sell because it's literally the game. What is the difference between the Vita and the Switch? Absolutely nothing. It is literally, it was a Switch, like Nintendo straight ripped off the PlayStation Vita. Like the Vita, like playing your console games on the go, because every game that you had on PS3, you got the PS Vita version for free. And you can play it on the go and cross save it. The PS Vita was a great idea. It just came out way too early. If the Vita came out in 2017, I think Nintendo, if the Vita came out at the same time as the Switch, I think the Switch would not be selling as well as it is.
Well,
what I mean?
Of course, the problem is that the Vita would have to be PS4 compatible or whatever. Which,
it was.
Which isn't to say they couldn't, but like, but the thing is that the crossover, we talk about fractioning of the fracturing of the gamer community. Though people who love their on the go, gaming. There are certain people, right? The same way that PC gamers are certain, they're their own subset of people, and the console gamers are. So a lot of people that were like, yeah, I love my PlayStation, aren't necessarily interested in taking a PlayStation on the go. Versus the people who love their DS weren't necessarily interested in sitting around in front of a PlayStation or even a GameCube. So that, I mean, there are ways to, and now it's weird to us now. You know what it is? The thing about the 2000s was it didn't have a smartphone, but now the 2010s had smartphones with it. So now, understanding how to game on the go and at home, and how the synergy between them, and that was kind of the thing they were aiming for in the 2000s. You saw the first inklings of what gaming is like today, which is, dedicated online, right? Online services dedicated online, turning your console into sort of an entertainment box that mostly plays video games, but also can do other things. Things that we take for granted now were a big deal. Like when the console generations changed in the mid 2000s, we went from the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube, and then we went to the Wii, the 360, and the PS3. What are they? I mean, the Wii didn't do this very well because Nintendo was slow about it online. But the online component and the rollout of non-gaming software to make going to your console more attractive. Watching Netflix on your console, surfing the internet on your console, all these other streaming services, all this stuff, having a music library, to things that a lot of people take for granted now on a PlayStation 4 and 5 or the Xbox One or Series X, were things that were novelties, and then people were like, why would I want that? I already got cable. But they didn't know that streaming services were about to blow up, right?
Yeah. Back then, just real quick before we get back on topic, one of the coolest things about the PS3 and the Xbox 360 is that you could play music while you played video games. And nowadays, a lot of people, I'm gonna just say this, a lot of people that are younger will listen to this and say, how is that cool? You guys got to understand, MP3 players were absolute shit back then. Like, I'm talking about terrible, like absolute piece of shit. And the only ones that were actually good were expensive as fuck Apple music players. Yep. Everything, like MP3 players were shitty. There was not Bluetooth speakers did not exist back then. Speakers, anything that was mobile back then was a piece of shit. Everything. If something was mobile, think back in the day. Cell phones, literally the only thing cell phones were good back then for is calling. And I won't even really say texting. I really won't even say texting back then. Texting really didn't start getting good until the late 2000s, right before smartphones came out. So even like back in the early 2000s, anything that was mobile was shitty. So for you to be able to sit there and play Call of Duty and listen to Jeezy or listen to any type of music you want was a absolute revelation back then. It was not something, like I said, a lot of people take it for granted now. Like a lot of stuff that the consoles came out with back then is like Xbox Live came out, massive. Like it was something that I was like, damn, playing online? What? Halo online? What? That sounds, like that was something that was a PC thing. To see a console do it. Then PlayStation started doing it, Nintendo had their little stupid thing where you had to buy this thing to cook to the, oh God, Nintendo. But
yeah, the 2000s were like, it's just like a lot of stuff was happening. Basically, the kind of they started making promises about what gaming was going to be like today, and so
Yeah.
that was first of all, the wonderful arcade died. Died. A slow but inevitable death because consoles were just equal or better. We had the rise of MMOs. Believe it or not, if you play World of Warcraft now, it started in the early 2000s, and the same game you're playing now was going on then. The rise of competitive shooters, which they started kind of in the late 90s with like Counter-Strike, but really came into their own, especially with stuff like Halo, and then the Battlefields, Call of Duty really kind of came into their own. Especially that console shooters turned out to be, they were bigger than the PC shooters.
Yeah. Yep.
We had Dota appear. So all these other Dota clones didn't exist. Dota actually was a mod of Warcraft 3, and now it's its own thing. The rise of rhythm games, rise and fall, I would say, because they lasted into the 2010s, but not much into them. But stuff like Dance Dance Revolution, the Rock Band and Guitar Hero, those sorts of games were kind of a big deal. And and real quick, the sandbox game, Grand Theft Auto 3 and its sequels were a revelation. Everyone plays 5 now. 3 was really where it started. So like 3 is where 5's DNA, and the DNA of 5 is from 3.
I'm gonna be honest with you and say Grand Theft Auto honestly made this generation. Like honestly, like Grand Theft, like you could see the Grand Theft Auto influence in video games back then, with Jack and Daxter going from being a Crash Bandicoot like game to becoming a sandbox city game where you could shoot the police, run away from the police. Literally, like there was not just Jack and Daxter. There's a couple of games I just can't think of off the top of my head where a lot of games got influenced by Grand Theft Auto, and that was the game of this era.
Simpson Hit and Run.
Oh yeah, Simpson. Oh yeah.
Literally.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Thank you. Oh.
I mean, it almost literally was like, let's just do GTA but in Springfield.
Oh yes. You bought the classic Simpsons
and
Hit and Run.
And by the way, not throwing shade at Simpsons Hit and Run at all. I'm not. I'm just saying, like, it's pretty clear it was a GTA.
It's basically the spoof of GTA, but it's ironic. A spoof became a freaking classic. Like, guys, you have to play Simpsons Hit and Run. Like, if you are a Grand Theft Auto fan and never played Simpsons Hit and Run, you are doing yourself an absolute disservice. Not only is it one of the best video games ever made, it is probably the greatest cartoon video game ever made, and I don't even think it's even close. Like, I can't even think of a cartoon game that will be even close to Simpsons Hit and Run. Great game. I beat that game like 10 times, man. Just as much as I played all the other Grand Theft Autos. But as we talk about Grand Theft Autos, another, elephant in the room that a lot of people want me to talk, like a lot of you audience want me to talk about is, and we hinted in the last era, this is where the 2000s is where the final straw of what you could put in a video game finally came to a head, where we started getting a lot of people starting to pay attention, like senators, like real talks, like the U.S. government getting involved in gaming.
Right. Well, and you know what? This is actually a good part to note that video games lead to violence. This came about because Columbine.
Yeah.
Columbine happened, and those guys happen to be, they happen to play online or computer shooters, PC shooters, and because politicians they don't want to think too hard about things. They basically are just like clearly the video games. I'm like, yes,
Clearly to be, yes.
clearly. I mean, these one guys did this thing, but like all these other people that don't go do that thing, they're not counting. Whatever. Point is,
Yeah.
The panic began, and the rating system had to come into play.
Yeah.
As a result.
And quite a few games got banned at this time. Like I'm talking about, like, when I'm like, what you guys understand is that at one point you could not buy Grand Theft Auto. Like, you could not go into the store and buy a Grand Theft Auto. It was literally banned. There's a lot of games I could put on this list. There was Grand Theft Auto, there was Mortal Kombat, and Twisted Metal. Twisted Metal Black deservedly should be banned. Like, that game, oh god, I gotta tell you guys a story about this game. This game is literally a horror game simulator. It was one of the games that it pushed, like, again, pushed the boundaries, because it had to be rated M, but it pushed the boundaries of rated M. This game, instead of having like cutscenes, it had live action cutscenes where it was actual actors showing up. And one of the main characters, his name is Sweet Tooth. To see a clown with his face, with blood coming down his face, and his hair is on fire. Because what you guys gotta understand, Twisted Metal was a kid's game back in PlayStation 1. So everybody who played, because I was a massive Twisted Metal fan. A lot of people were. If you're a PlayStation fan, you played Twisted Metal 1, 2, 3, all that stuff. So Twisted Metal Black, which was Twisted Metal 4, we were all excited for. But we've heard it was rated M. So one of my friends had older brother. He was at the time. He's actually your age, Maurice. He went and bought us the game, right? And we all decided to play it. And when we just played as the main character, Sweet Tooth, just to see this dude in the electric chair, hair is on fire. They try to put the mask on him. His hair burned through the mask, and they try to electrocute him. But they were like, well, there was a guy who came in and said, I'll give you an opportunity to redeem yourself. You just have to win this tournament. And basically, each tournament, he's basically killing people. And you're seeing in the cutscenes them killing people. I'm not talking about pan away. I'm talking about you are literally seeing horror movie like stuff in this game. And I was like, what? Twisted Metal Black came out when I was like, let me look up the date. Twisted Metal Black. Twisted Metal Black came out in 01. I was 8 years old. I was 8 years old playing this game. This game was freaking me the hell out. And it just shows you, because there was a lot of crazy stuff. Like, there was a priest, they show him kill a whole entire church. There was a part of like a woman who was basically, her mask is nails like slowly going in. Oh man, the game was very, very violent, gory, and just straight up horror like. And the game got banned. It was one of those games that just got banned. Mortal Kombat, in my opinion, sort of, I feel like, didn't really deserve to be banned. The game was violent, but it was like a spoofy violent. Because, one of the main things that about Mortal Kombat is funny, with Scorpion saying, get over here, and the guy saying toasty and all that stuff. I feel like that game should not have been banned, but Deadly Alliance, like, they had to make Deception really quick because Deadly Alliance got banned. And I think you couldn't buy Deadly Alliance at all after it got banned. It wasn't until later on that they re-released it, because this is where the release rating that I'm pretty sure none of you guys heard of, but me as someone who grew up in the 2000s remember this one. AO. If you were given the rating AO, that was a death sentence for a video game. Because you know why? Only adults can buy the game. You had to be 21 and up. Like, and if you bought the game, like, let's say, like, for a good example, me and my brother wanted to buy Mortal Kombat Deception, right? We could not. When me and my brother, I told my brother, before we went into Walmart, we need to stay in the car. And he's like, why? I'm like, they will not let us get this game. And I'm like, well, he's like, what are you talking about? It's, like it's rated AO, but he didn't believe me. We went in and got it. We went in and tried to get it. And the guy at Walmart refused to sell us this game. You guys are probably listening to this and saying, what, really? Like, no, real talk. If you were rated AO and they saw you with a kid, they will not sell you the game. That was a death sentence, because that's what happened with Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. It got banned for a couple of months, and then it got relabeled with AO, and that basically just ruined it for any kid that never got a chance to play Grand Theft Auto before. They could never play San Andreas again unless their family members went in and bought it, but their parents are not going to buy it because it's rated AO, and they're going to warn them like, hey, if you have any kids at home, because remember, this is another thing that happened at this time. They did the disclaimer before they bought you the game. Remember? Mm-hmm. So it pretty much, like I said, if you were a kid back then and you wanted to play these quote unquote violent games, dead. Ain't happening. They made sure, the US government almost made it impossible to play any game that had some little bit of splash of blood in it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, the more mainstreaming that video game, which mainstream video gaming is pretty much what you would call the 2000s, that as it became bigger and more popular and more. That's the time when people are like, oh, look how much video games pull in per year versus Hollywood box office, that sort of thing. So it became big business, and online became big, and the kind of esports were in their infancy, but were coming. There's a bunch of stuff that was happening. So, can you believe it? We spent like almost an hour talking about that. We didn't even get to the 2010. So we'll have to come back and really kind of delve into the last 10 years of gaming, and talk about what we've seen in terms of trends. But this was fun. Hey, for a slow news week, we sure had a lot to say about this. So, but I'm pretty sure we missed a lot. A lot of things happened in those 30 years. So, if there was something we missed, or do you think we got some things wrong, you know what you can do? Get down to the comments, let us know what you're thinking about. And, of course, you can hit us up, supernotfunnyshow@gmail.com. We'd really appreciate that, to hear from you about that. And also, while you're in the clicking mood, why don't you get down there and hit that subscribe button and join the Super Not Funny Show family. We'd appreciate that. And also, there's a notification bell. You can hit that to let you know when we are going to be dropping new content. And, we do a couple podcast reviews, all that fun stuff. So check all that out. Show us some love. Really appreciate that. Speaking of showing love, I could not do this show without the knowledge and the insight of my good friend Lottie. So, Lottie, where can the good listeners go to check out your stuff on social media?
Oh yeah, you guys could always find me on my Instagram, which is Anukinihun. It is ANUKINIHUN. Again, it's ANUKINIHUN. I'm always on there putting up videos, pictures of stuff that I'm working on for my video game, or other projects I'm working on. And of course, you can also find me on my YouTube channel, KeenyHoon25. Constantly upload videos and different tech stuff. I'm actually working on starting and making an emulating machine, so I can start playing some classic games. We can actually show you guys, like with this Wayback Machine episode, can actually show you what gaming was like back then. So stay tuned for that. I'm excited.
That sounds good. You guys go show Lottie some love and his various social medias, and that'd be really cool. Support him and the things he's doing. So that's the Gamercast for this week. I'll come back next week. We're going to be doing more news, and maybe we'll finish up this whole kind of, I don't want to call it history of gaming, but kind of our look back at the last few decades of gaming. We'll probably try to follow that up. So thanks again for joining us. Come back again next week for that. Until then, I've been Mo de Poupée, your resident fabricant and commenter extraordinaire on all things pop culture, joined by the lover of all things superhero, anime enthusiast, and of course, video game designer, and that's Lottie. And we'll see you guys on the other side of the thread. Peace.
Peace.